Hello again, and welcome back to the visual dynamics of Upper Palaeolithic art. I'm Julia, and today we're going to dig into something that, honestly, I think we all experience, even if we don't always have a name for it: pareidolia. If you've ever looked at a cloud and thought, that's definitely a rabbit, or seen a face in the front of a car, you've had a little taste of what pareidolia is all about. It's this automatic, almost sneaky process our brains do, where we see meaningful shapes, faces, animals, you name it, in random patterns. Now, in the world of cave art, pareidolia has been a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it helps us understand why people might have seen animals in the bumps and cracks of cave walls. On the other, it's also led researchers, and, let's be honest, all of us, at some point, to misinterpret natural rock markings as intentional art. There are some classic examples, like seeing a horse or a bird in a cave surface, when it's really just a trick of the light and shadow. I remember the first time I really noticed pareidolia in my own life. I was a kid staring at the bathroom tiles, and I was convinced there was a lion's face staring back at me every time I brushed my teeth. It sounds silly, but that little moment, seeing something that wasn't really there, kind of set me off on this lifelong fascination with how we see and interpret images, especially in ancient art. And as we talked about in our last episode, this tendency to see animals everywhere isn't just a quirk. It's deeply rooted in how our brains evolved to keep us safe, to spot threats or opportunities in the environment, even if it means jumping at shadows sometimes. So pareidolia is everywhere, and it's not just a human thing. Infants, even some monkeys, show signs of it. But when it comes to cave art, relying too much on pareidolia can get us into trouble. It's a bit like seeing what we want to see rather than what's actually there. And that's where things start to get really interesting, because there's more to the story than just our brains playing tricks on us. All right, so let's move beyond pareidolia for a minute. There's this newer concept, well, newer in the sense that it's not in every psychology textbook yet, called hyperdolia. It's a term Derek Hodgson introduced, and it's kind of a step up from pareidolia. Instead of just seeing random shapes as something familiar, hyperdolia is about our brains being primed by emotion, culture, even ritual, to see very specific images in ambiguous places. It's not just that rock looks a bit like a horse. It's more like, I'm expecting to see a horse, and so I do. What's wild is that when you look at Upper Paleolithic cave art, you see this incredible consistency. Horses, bison, mammoths, these animals show up again and again over thousands of years. If it was just pareidolia, you'd expect a lot more variety, maybe more human faces or just random shapes, but that's not what we find. Instead, it's almost as if the artists, and maybe the whole community, were tuned in to see and create these particular animals. That's hyperdolia in action. The visual system is primed by cultural expectations, emotional investment, and repeated experiences. So certain images just pop out more than others. And here's something that always gets me thinking: why are human faces so rare in cave art, when faces are one of the most common things people see in pareidolia? I mean, if you've ever done a Rorschach test, you know faces are the first thing that come to mind. But in these ancient caves, it's almost all animals. That suggests there's something more going on, maybe cultural beliefs, maybe ritual practices, that's shaping what people see and what they choose to depict. It's like the whole community is collectively primed to focus on certain animals, and that focus gets reinforced over generations. So hyperdolia isn't just about seeing things, it's about how our minds, our emotions and our cultures work together to create a kind of visual feedback loop. The more you expect to see something, the more likely you are to actually see it, and then to make it real by drawing it on the cave wall. It's a much more nuanced and, honestly, a much more human process than just random pattern spotting. Now, let's get a bit nerdy for a second and talk about what's happening in the brain when all this is going on. Neuroscience has shown that when we see animals, or even just the outlines of animals, there are specific areas in our brains that light up. There's a whole network, including the amygdala, that's tuned to pick out animals quickly, probably because for most of human history, knowing where the animals were was a matter of survival. But it's not just about the brain's wiring. The environment plays a huge role too. Imagine being deep in a cave, with only a flickering torch for light. The shadows move, the contours of the rock shift, and suddenly an animal shape seems to leap out at you. That's not just pareidolia or hyperdolia at work. It's the whole sensory experience, the emotional intensity, maybe even the ritual context, all coming together to make these images feel real, even magical. And here's where modern technology comes in. Researchers have started using things like virtual reality and neuroimaging to test these ideas, and the results are pretty exciting. They're finding that the same brain areas that light up when we see real animals also activate when we look at cave art, especially when the images are ambiguous or incomplete. It's like our brains are filling in the gaps, using memory, emotion, and expectation to complete the picture. This really supports what Derek Hodgson was saying back in 2008, and it's amazing to see how his ideas have held up as the science has advanced. So, to wrap up for today, moving beyond pareidolia to hyperdolia gives us a much richer understanding of how and why these iconic animal images were created. It's not just about seeing things that aren't there, it's about how culture, emotion, ritual, and the environment all shape what we see and what we make. And honestly, I think that's a much more interesting story. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time as we keep exploring the mysteries behind the art on the cave walls. There's still so much more to uncover,